If someone had told me that life could start over, I wouldn't have believed it. But when I opened my eyes and found myself lying on a carved wooden bed, with a handsome ancient man sleeping next to me, I had no choice but to face the truth. I was, once, the director of an investment company. In modern society, I was the quintessential city professional, with a life packed full of meetings and work. Just the night before, I had been burning the midnight oil for a merger case. Yet, when I blinked my eyes open, I found myself in this unfamiliar world. The original owner of this body was called Xiao Chu, the well-known owner of a pastry shop on this street. Not long ago, she had married Su Yuan, a scholar by background. Memories from before the time travel tell me that this is a sweet romance set in ancient times, and somehow, I'd become the heroine. Wife, lost in thought again? The man beside me gently pulled me into his embrace. This had been his habit since our wedding, saying he didn't want me to get cold at night. His breath and actions were so natural, as if we had embraced like this 1,000 times before. Instinctively, I wanted to pull away. In the modern world, I always despised such intimate gestures, thinking of them as signs of weakness. But for some reason, being held by him felt surprisingly comforting. Just thinking about today's pastries, I responded casually. In truth, I was fretting. I hadn't even mastered cooking instant noodles, so how was I supposed to run a pastry shop? You've been preoccupied lately, Su Yuan gently stroked my hair. Are you worried about something? I froze. In the modern world, I was used to putting on a brave face, never showing my vulnerability. Yet he could instantly see through my unease. Nothing really, just thinking about some new recipes I want to try. He chuckled softly. My wife is always so thoughtful. But don't overwork yourself, whatever you make, I'll love it. He said it so casually, yet it warmed my heart. In the modern world, I was used to striving for perfection. Clients' high demands, supervisors' critiques, and subordinates' expectations left no room for any misstep. But here he was, telling me he'd love whatever I made. Before dawn, we got up to open the shop. As I watched him efficiently dress, I was still in a daze. In modern times, I never trusted sweet words from men, always seeing them as superficial. But Su Yuan's kindness seemed genuine, proven through his actions. He quietly cleaned up the flour I clumsily spilled while kneading dough. He would hand me the tools I needed exactly when I was fumbling around looking for them. And when I was too busy to eat, he would feed me the meals he had thoughtfully prepared, one bite at a time. Here's the translation of the next part. Dear, tell me, why do you like me? This question had been on my mind for a long time. In the modern world, I had met too many men with sweet words and had experienced supposedly passionate romances. But in the end, they either wanted my career or couldn't handle my assertiveness. I wanted to know if, in this ancient world, a man's answer would be any different. Su Yuan paused for a moment, then smiled and said, silly, because you're you. Just the kind of answer to please a naive girl. I smirked internally, but I couldn't deny that the way he said it, the expression on his face and the tone in his voice, was completely different from those in the modern world. There was no calculated flattery, no casual dismissal, only a sense of certainty, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. This left me feeling a little puzzled. In the modern world, whenever I encountered such situations, I would start analyzing the other person's intentions. But here, with Su Yuan, my business instincts were failing me. Perhaps his kindness felt too genuine, or maybe the lingering emotions of this body were influencing me. But none of that mattered, I reminded myself. Since I'd been thrust into this world, I could only adapt to this life for now. As for feelings, I've weathered the storms of modern life. How could I be swayed by a few words from an ancient man? The sky was beginning to lighten, it was time to open the shop. Watching Su Yuan bustling about, I pressed my lips together. Let's see how this plays out. I'll treat it as an interesting social experiment, perhaps? As a modern career woman, I'm used to relying on data. For the past 3 months, I've been observing this so-called wife-doting male protagonist. While I was calculating the shop's accounts this morning, Su Yuan had already returned with the day's ingredients. From the original owner's memories, I knew that Xiao Chu used to go out before dawn to make purchases and was often deceived by crafty vendors. But ever since Su Yuan took over this task, the shop's costs had dropped by 20%. Husband, how do you manage that? I couldn't help but ask him once. You taught me, wife, he said while preparing tea for me. I remember when we first got married, you told me to look for plump grains of glutinous rice and to pick dates that were medium-sized and not too dry. I was taken aback. Not only did he remember, but he actually figured it all out. No wonder the pastries from our shop had been tasting better lately. He'd been meticulous in selecting ingredients from the start. In the modern world, I'd seen plenty of men who offered to help but weren't really attentive, often making things worse. But Su Yuan was different. He genuinely worked hard for this household. The numbers in the account book didn't lie. Since he started helping, not only had the costs dropped, but even our loyal customers were praising how the flavors had become more authentic. I couldn't help but admire him, even by modern standards. He was a smart man, but he devoted all his cleverness to taking care of me. When I was out buying today, I ran into the delivery boy from the Lee family, he said suddenly. He mentioned that the red bean crop in the capital didn't do well this year, so the price is likely to go up. I was thinking, should we stock up a bit more? I raised an eyebrow. This kind of market foresight was something only top-tier business professionals would have in the modern world. So I casually asked, and how much does my husband think we should stock? Based on our usual usage, about 3 months' worth would be just right. Any more, and it might spoil; any less, and we might not have enough. Listening to his calm and orderly analysis, I suddenly found it amusing. Here I was, using corporate standards to test an ancient man. But I had to admit, he had far exceeded my expectations. This level of awareness and attention to detail reminded me of the excellent business partners I used to work with. The difference, however, was that those partners were driven by profit, while Su Yuan did it purely to ease my burdens. Oh, by the way, he pulled out a small package from his sleeve. I also met a merchant from Yunnan today. He had some interesting tea leaves. I figured you'd been staying up late working on the accounts, so I bought some to help you stay alert. I accepted the tea. It was high-quality pu'er. In the modern world, this kind of tea was something used only during high-level business negotiations. But he bought it just because he didn't want me to get too tired. This left me feeling a bit dazed. In the modern world, I had seen too many well-intentioned gestures with hidden agendas. But Su Yuan's care was both thoughtful and rational, leaving even someone like me, a career woman, without a single reason to criticize. All day today, I've been pondering one question. In the modern world, a man like this would either be trying to secure a position under me as a director or aiming for my investment connections. But what could Su Yuan possibly want? Husband, I asked him as we closed the shop that evening, do you think I should change the way we run the shop? I was deliberately testing him. In the modern world, whenever the topic of business came up, men would eagerly rush to share their brilliant insights. How would my wife like to change it? He asked while cleaning the counter, his tone casual, but it made me perk up my ears. For example, opening a branch? He thought for a moment. If you feel you can manage it, then it's a good idea. I was stunned. If this were a modern man, he would have said something like, I'll help you manage it. But his concern was whether I might be overworking myself. Or, I continued testing, what if we hire a manager to help? That could work, but we'd need someone trustworthy, he said thoughtfully. We wouldn't want your secret recipe stolen. Once again, I was surprised. He didn't recommend someone he knew, nor did he imply that a woman like me couldn't handle business. In the modern world, whenever it came to major decisions, men always tried to guide me. So, husband, you really trust me? I joked lightly. Aren't you afraid I'll run the business into the ground? Silly, he shook his head with a smile. Your attention to detail far exceeds mine. Every time I see you going through the accounts, I'm filled with admiration. I instinctively tightened my grip on the account book. In the modern world, as an investment director, I'd faced nothing but cold numbers and cutthroat competition. But now, here I was, feeling genuine appreciation from an ancient man. The bigger surprise came the next morning. Just as I was preparing to find a reliable manager, I noticed a booklet on the table. I opened it and found it filled with detailed notes on the strengths and weaknesses of various shopkeepers. The second son of the Zhang family is sharp, but too opportunistic. The youngest of the Li family is honest, but too timid to handle picky customers. The widow from the Wang family is the most dependable, but she has young children to care for, so she might not have enough time. The handwriting was Su Yuan's. Clearly, he had been quietly observing these people for a while, waiting for the day when I would want to expand the shop. Suddenly, I understood something. In the modern world, men often spoke of support, but behind the scenes, they competed with me at every turn. Su Yuan, however, was genuinely paving the way for me. That night, as I counted the day's earnings, I couldn't help but wonder, could a man like this even exist in the modern world? Wife, his voice interrupted my thoughts, have you had something on your mind lately? I looked up to see the concern in his eyes. That kind of worry wasn't fake. I'd spent enough years in the business world to know the difference. I've been thinking, I blurted out without meaning to, why are you so good to me? Why am I so good to you? Su Yuan repeated my question, a trace of confusion flickering in his eyes. I quickly lowered my head to organize the copper coins, trying to cover up my moment of weakness. In the modern world, I would never ask such vulnerable questions. Emotions are like business, if you care too much, you put yourself in a passive position. Because, he began slowly. My hands froze. Years of experience in business told me that hesitation usually meant someone was carefully choosing their words. In the modern world, at times like this, men would always say something flattering, like, because you're worth it, because you're perfect, or, because I love you. Because you're always so tired. His answer stunned me. I looked up and saw him gazing at me, a slight worry in his expression. You carry everything on your shoulders, he continued. Managing the shop, developing new products, balancing the accounts, you handle every detail yourself. The only thing I can do is try to make things a little easier for you. I suddenly felt disoriented. In the modern world, I had gotten used to people focusing only on the power and resources I controlled. But what he saw was my exhaustion. You don't have to, I started to say instinctively. I know you can handle it, he interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. But I'm your husband. Such a simple statement, yet it made my heart tremble. In the modern world, when a man says, let me take care of you, it usually has ulterior motives. But the way he said it, it felt as natural as it was supposed to be. Besides, he added with a smile, your pastries are so delicious. If I didn't treat you well, wouldn't I be missing out? I couldn't help but laugh. This man always knew how to lighten the mood with a joke when I was being too serious. Thinking back on these days, he really had been looking after me in his own way. Not with the suffocating control or careless gestures I was used to, but by quietly filling in wherever I might fall short. For instance, the neat notes in the account book, he had added them, one stroke at a time, while I rested. Or when I developed new products, he would discreetly gather information on unique ingredients from other regions. And then there was... Wait. I suddenly remembered something. Last week, there was a troublesome drunkard who kept coming to the shop to harass me. I had been worrying about how to deal with him, but he suddenly disappeared. Could it be? Husband, I asked tentatively, about that drunk who kept causing trouble last week. His expression remained calm. Maybe he didn't like the taste of our pastries. I looked at him, suspicious. This man, usually so gentle, seemed to have a more forceful side than I'd realized. But since he wasn't saying anything, I decided not to ask further. In the modern world, I always felt that the more perfect a man appeared, the more cautious I needed to be. But Su Yuan, he made caring for me seem the most natural thing in the world. He didn't show off, didn't seek credit, and didn't even let me notice. Could I trust someone like this? Before dawn today, the shop was already in chaos. Aunt Wan from next door came running over, panting, saying there had been a flood outside the city, and refugees were pouring in. There might be unrest. I immediately became alert. In the modern world, whenever the market fluctuated, I would be the first to implement risk control. But in this ancient time, what could I do? Wife, Su Yuan had already gotten ready, stay in the shop. I'll go find out more about the situation. Wait, I stopped him, don't be in such a hurry. In the modern world, I had experienced too many crises and knew that in critical moments, it's the small details that matter the most. I quickly organized my thoughts. First, we need to move anything valuable from the shop and hide the box with the silver notes. Second, we should store today's flour and fillings in batches to avoid everything being stolen at once. And halfway through, I noticed Su Yuan was smiling at me. What? I felt a little uneasy. In the modern world, I was used to competently giving orders during a crisis. But here in this era, was it improper for a woman to be so assertive? Nothing, he said with a smile. I just think you're amazing. Everything I was about to say, you've already thought of. I was taken aback. In the modern world, whenever I showed my strong side, men would either be secretly dissatisfied or give lip service while opposing me. But he didn't feel like I was overstepping, instead, he seemed relieved. Soon, the noise outside grew louder. I was about to close the door when I saw a group of ragged women and children crowding at the entrance. Their faces were filled with hunger and panic. Husband, I instinctively looked at Su Yuan. Yes, I see. He understood immediately and turned toward the kitchen. Not long after, he brought out a basket of steaming hot buns. It was only then that I noticed he had already prepared a pot of dough. It seemed he had anticipated this long before I had. The rest of the day, we were kept busy like this. He stayed in the kitchen, constantly steaming and cooking, while I maintained order at the front. Although the refugees were starving, they didn't cause any trouble, seeing that we were managing things fairly. Husband, late at night when all was quiet, I couldn't help but ask, we used so much food today. Won't we suffer a big loss? Silly, he patted my head. We can always earn more money, but staying safe is what matters most. He said it so casually, but his words struck me deeply. In the modern world, everyone had taught me to put profit first, to maximize returns. But in a time of crisis, his priority was how to ensure more people got through it safely. It was late at night. After cleaning up the last steamer, Su Yuan and I walked side by side along the path home. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and he held an oil paper umbrella, shielding me from the light rain. The events of today left me feeling dazed. During the crisis, we had worked together with such perfect harmony. He always handed me what I needed at just the right moment, and I could understand the meaning behind every glance he gave me. Wife, are you tired? He asked softly. I shook my head but couldn't resist leaning a little closer to him. At times like this, I felt as if I didn't need to maintain my usual clear-headed and composed self anymore. When we arrived home, without a word, he went to make ginger tea. I sat at the table, trying to calculate the day's losses, but my pen kept scratching aimlessly across the paper, unable to write a single number. My mind was filled with today's scenes, him breaking the last bun in half to share with the children on the street, offering me hot tea when I was exhausted, and quietly taking over all the heavy labor so I could focus on handling the situation in front of us. A steaming bowl of ginger tea was placed in front of me, interrupting my thoughts. Leave the bookkeeping for tomorrow. Warm yourself up first, he said, placing a warm towel over my shoulders. As I held the ginger tea, I suddenly realized that, at some point, I had grown used to his care. It wasn't the kind of anxious dependency that came from fear of losing, but rather a natural reliance, as simple as breathing. I feel like I figured something out, I said quietly. I've always wondered why you're so good to me, I said, staring at the ginger tea in my bowl. But today, I suddenly understood that some things don't need a reason. Like how we helped the refugees today, he asked with a smile. Yes, just like that. I smiled too. It turns out that love is the same, it's not about weighing gains and losses, not about testing each other, but about naturally being by the other person's side when needed. So my wife finally understands, he said, pulling my hand into his. I've never been good to you for any particular reason. The warm ginger tea, the warmth of his hand, and the undeniable joy in his eyes. At this moment, I suddenly felt that perhaps this is what love looks like at its best. It doesn't need to be grand or dramatic, there's no need for constant give and take, just simple, peaceful, and utterly genuine. The moonlight was especially beautiful tonight. I sat at a small table in the backyard, organizing today's accounts by the light of the moon. Not far away, I could hear Su Yuan's gentle voice as he taught the neighbors' children to read. Ever since the flood, these children often came to help out at our shop, and Su Yuan had taken the opportunity to teach them to read and write. I put down my pen and quietly watched the scene. He patiently guided each child, just like he had once taught me to read the account books. Unknowingly, I've already lived in this world for half a year. I had originally thought I was just an outsider, needing to remain rational and alert at all times. But now, I feel a sense of warmth in this place, like a home. That's enough for today, Su Yuan said as he sent the children home and brought over some freshly brewed tea. Are you doing the accounts again? I took the tea, but I didn't continue writing. What's wrong? He asked as he sat across from me. I've been thinking, I said, taking a sip of tea, that our life seems better than I ever expected. He smiled. So, my wife finally doesn't doubt me anymore? I paused for a moment. So, he had always been aware of my guardedness, but he never brought it up. This thoughtfulness made me feel a pang of guilt. I used to, always feel like I had to be on guard, I said quietly. I know. He reached out and took my hand. But I also know that my wife is worth waiting for, even if it takes a lifetime for her to let down her defenses. In the moonlight, his gaze was clear and unwavering. In that moment, I suddenly realized that I had unknowingly fallen for his deep affection. Su Yuan, I said suddenly, I want to tell you a secret. Maybe it was the beauty of the moon, or maybe it was the warmth of his kindness, but I decided to tell him the truth about me coming from the modern world. Even if he didn't believe me, even if it scared him, I wanted to share the secret with him. But before I could speak, he gently interrupted me. You don't need to say it. Why not? Because no matter what secret you have, it won't change the fact that I love you, he said earnestly. You are who you are, and that's enough. My heart tightened with emotion. This man always knew how to give me the security I needed at just the right moment. But, aren't you curious? I couldn't help but ask. Of course I'm curious, he said with a smile. But I'm more looking forward to the day when you feel ready to tell me. That will be the moment when you fully trust me. The moonlight gently bathed the courtyard, and the fragrance of tea lingered in the air. As I looked at this man before me, I suddenly realized that my identity and origin no longer seemed so important. What mattered was that, in this moment, I was by his side, feeling the solid and comforting love he offered. At last, I understood that the most precious thing about love is not the grand confessions or the dazzling promises, but the steady, flowing companionship in the quiet moments of life. The peach blossoms in the courtyard have bloomed and fallen again. I've now spent an entire year in this world. I remember how fearful and unsettled I felt when I first arrived, constantly afraid that this was all just a dream. But now, as I look at the bustling crowd in the shop and smell the sweet aroma of pastries, everything feels so real. Look, my dear, Su Yuan handed me a beautifully bound ledger. I opened it and was stunned. It was a complete journal of our business, documenting every change in the shop over the past year. Not only did it record the income and expenses, but also the preferences of the neighbors, the sales during holidays, and even feedback on each new product we launched. When did you? From the first day you took over the accounts, he said with a smile. I thought, since you're taking it so seriously, I should keep up with you. As I flipped through the pages, I found many small notes tucked between them. There were records of the time I disastrously ruined my first batch of pastries, sketches of me deep in thought while creating new recipes, and even a drawing of me yawning. What's all this? Because every moment with you is beautiful, he said matter-of-factly. I was afraid I wouldn't remember them, so I drew them. My eyes began to well up. Over the past year, it wasn't just me observing him, he had been carefully recording our every little moment together too. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew, and an old, yellowed piece of paper fell out of the ledger. I picked it up and saw it was a poem. Gentle rain nourishes spring's deep breath. Pastry scent draws forth beauty's guest. No grand ambitions to shake the world. Just wish to spend my life with you, blessed. The date at the bottom was from the very day I first traveled to this world. This? You seemed so lost that day, he said softly. I thought to myself, maybe the heavens had given me a task, to make sure you felt at peace here. I couldn't hold back anymore. I threw myself into his arms. Forget about the modern woman's pride, forget the mask of the corporate professional, none of that mattered in this moment. Su Yuan, I have something to tell you. I'm listening. And so, I told him everything about where I came from, down to the last detail. After I finished, I anxiously looked at him, worried about seeing doubt or rejection in his eyes. But he simply held me tighter. No wonder you were so cautious at first. But no matter where you came from, the person you are now belongs here. I rested against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and suddenly understood, happiness is this simple. No need for grand theories or endless guessing, just a life of quiet companionship, living through the ordinary days together. I looked at the courtyard filled with falling peach blossoms, and smiled. Perhaps this was destiny, leading a modern woman who didn't believe in love to this ancient world, where she would meet someone worthy of her trust for a lifetime. My dear, he suddenly said, shall we have a child? I playfully slapped him in mock annoyance, but my heart was filled with sweetness. In this moment, I could finally say without hesitation. Yes. The end.